Hi, everyone. I am Andra Annette, and welcome to this week's session of Building Community. And today I have a very special guest with me, Dr. Cheryl Okoli. I really love what she does. She is a doctor of health administration, and she really focuses on healing organizations one employee at a time. So she comes with a wide range in background, both clinical and non-clinical. She was a nurse, a clinical nurse specialist, and she has over 20 years of experience. And she really uses evidence-based practice frameworks to guide her consults. And I love that. Her being a nurse and me being a nurse, we know that evidence-based practice really is what guides us in and on those paths. So I love what she's doing. Let's meet her and let's talk about what she's currently doing to really focus on advocacy on a state, local, and legislative level. Okay, so state and local is the same, but on, you know what I mean, on a global level. Okay. Hi, sweetie. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm
I
honored.
love it. When I met you, I just really love what you're out there doing and how you're trying to really affect change in communities and
Mhm.
individuals. And I think it's needed. I think organizations sometimes look at the organizational level, but they don't focus on the individual and how that individual impacts that organization, that it's all of those collective individuals that really build that company. And if there's unwellness at any step of that organization, then the organization is not functioning at its full impact.
True, very true. I agree 100%. Yes, employees make up an organization. Without employees, you can't have an organization. You can have a business. You can't really serve your clients or patients, depending on what setting you are in. So, yeah, it's important. It's imperative, actually, that we care for employees holistically. And when I use the word holistically, I mean physical, mental, social, culture, and spiritual domains. And some organizations try to maybe address one aspect and not other aspects. But as especially with what's happened in the past few years globally, organizations are more inclined to be more holistic in their approach in meeting the needs. They're more inclined. There's still lots to be done, but yes, I agree. We need to take care of that employee as an individual. Yeah.
I was talking with a friend earlier on another show. We do another show about entrepreneurial life, and we were talking about the different modalities that are available today. And that years ago, a doctor might just tell you, okay, follow this diet because you have heart disease, do this, do this. And now that there seems to be a shift and they're more open to encompassing other practices, other modalities, because they realize that each individual is separate and certain things will work for some and they won't work for others. So they might tell a patient to do yoga to reduce their stress, or so that is that holistic approach that really should have been there all along. And they are a little more open to that. And it's good to see. And I think that it's going to impact wellness on a much greater scale. Because if you're emotionally broke or spiritually unfit, you're not well. That
Yeah.
one person makes up the whole.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up a different angle of holism or holistic because I'm a firm believer it's important that we have the same working definition or description when we're talking. When I say we, generic we, not just you and I, just at large, right? So holistic for some, yes, could mean, like I said earlier, physical, mental, social, cultural, spiritual, but then there's the holistic modalities when you talk about conventional versus non-conventional or conventional and complementary modalities. Yeah. So I think it's important that we kind of make it clear, people understand what we're talking about. But I agree with you 100% that employers and organizations are more inclined to incorporate now the non-conventional or complementary modalities. And that's evident from the fact that sometimes we see now that they're not more inclined to provide maybe insurance coverage or benefits for certain modalities, which they would not have a long time ago. For example, when you talk about chiropractic modalities or massage therapies, historically, they weren't always covered, right, in
Mm.
benefits. So they're now incorporating what I like to call complementary or conventional. But the funny thing is that if you were to ask maybe a naturopath or someone who is more inclined into the more non-conventional, they're like, no, it's not alternative. It's not unconventional, it is complementary. And some might even argue that should be deemed traditional versus what we call traditional. So it's very interesting that you bring that up. But yes, I agree that we really need to be holistic in our approach, whichever description I've provided so far and you provided. And because ultimately, I do believe the individual knows what's best for them. Yes,
And it
they might
is,
need
it,
guidance, but yes, so it's good to ask the person, what do you think would benefit you? And if you need a rationale, provide it. But you don't necessarily need to tell your employer that because there comes some boundaries, right? You don't always have to tell your employer or your supervisor what you're ailing with, what your morbidity is, yeah, what your illness is. You don't need to tell them. There's certain rights that you have. But if you're at that level with your supervisor, whereby you know what, you're more maybe on a friendly term, or I shouldn't even use the word friendly, more transparent, and there's a safe culture. That's the word, a safe working culture, right? Whereby it's non-toxic, then you can see employees sharing more about their lifestyles or their struggles in the work environment. What are your thoughts?
well, I think that's important that that it is a shared culture. So I think that in order to empower that environment,
Mhm.
you have to encompass that yourself. So if you want the employees to do things that are going to help manage stress, then you have to make that available to them, offer them that space where they can go and close their eyes and step back and pause from the day. If they're stressed, they can walk away and go into a calm environment and have
Mhm.
music there. And I think that if employees had a space like that, a safe space where they could go and listen to music if the work's getting too much and stress, or walk away for a few minutes and come back, that we're not assembly line workers, that we do have needs as an individual. And even in the best situations, there's stress. So we have to really look at ways that we can manage it at home and at work, right?
Yeah.
So if employees are under a lot of stress at work, or at home, they should have a safe space where they can de-stress even while they work. So they're not bringing in the stress from home and then having more stress at work, and it's compiled, and then there's no place to vent. There needs to be that balance. And when we talk about work-life balance, they should both be at a level where there's not that disalignment in who we are. Because
Mhm.
even if you're an employee in something that is not your ultimate career goal, right?
Mhm.
If you're in a janitorial position or you're a checkout person, there still should be that level of respect. And if, let's say, a client or a customer comes in and they're being disrespectful to your employee, there should be some form of interaction from that boss that says this is not accepted here, to
Mhm.
show that client that this is balance and we're not going to allow that toxicity here,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. If I may interject, you mentioned three things I want to expand on, if I may. The first thing you mentioned, stress. So I think also there's a matter of perspective as well. When I say that, There are two kinds of stress. There's distress and eustress,
Mhm.
right? So distress is a negative kind of stress. So that could be maybe, for example, the workplace is forever experiencing turnovers, negative turnover. So that's stressful on not just the employees who need to maybe orientate new employees or just maybe new technological system coming in. That's just way too much. That's just stressful, right? But then there's the use stress, right? There's the use stress of maybe, for example, you know what, we've always had a smaller building, again, regardless of work setting or industry. We've always had a small work setting, but now we're going to expand to a bigger building. So we're going to transport all of our equipment, whatever, to a different building. That is stressful, but it's a kind of good kind of stress, right? Because you're going to a bigger place, better environment, hopefully more resources, right? So why I said there's perspective matters, because when someone comes to me and tells me there's stress or asks me, what should I do when stressed? My approach would be, tell me about the stress, okay? Because by asking them or having an open-ended question like that, it gets them to basically vent if they need to vent and just explain. But then by, again, bringing into perspective, is this a distress? Is this a eustress? However you categorize it will definitely help you in how you manage it. And hopefully we can guide you if you need help in providing a care plan or strategy in addressing the stress, okay? Now, the second thing you mentioned quite a few things I really wanted to talk about, but
Well,
I can't.
eustress is a natural part of the body. Your body responds to eustress well. So, this is a natural part of your body. Your body is set up for eustress. So even though it's positive, your body does react and it does set off other things in your body. So we do still have to manage it.
Yeah,
It might be healthy, but we have to manage it.
I agree 100%. So a classic example would be, let's say, for example, a woman or a family expecting a newborn, and let's say the pregnancy was planned. So you're excited, this newborn is coming into being, is coming into the family, but there is some stress associated with it. So that's
Being a
eustress. And
first
when you
time
talk about,
parent, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes, all that, yes.
yeah. Mhm. So yeah, trying to remember what were the other points. So you talked about stress initially, and you talked about the environment. Oh yes, you talked about basically unhealthy, maybe communications in the workplace, interpersonally, and a boss stepping in if need be. Yeah, absolutely. If it's a healthy work environment, not many people are aware of what's called the toxic triad or the toxic leader triangle. Basically, the premise is this: in a work environment, well, the word toxic is a clue right there. That's not healthy. But usually, when there's someone at the top who is toxic, and the fact it's a triangle tells you there are two different players as well. They could be like what are called what is the environment, which is the second one. So basically, an environment that is conducive to propagating that toxic environment. And then there are the colluders, and there's another category of people. Basically, they are not, some of them, the colluders may not necessarily be toxic themselves, but basically, out of fear of the toxic leader, they just acquiesce and do whatever they're asked to do. And then there's some that are really, they're the conformers. Yeah. So the conformers are the ones that are not necessarily wicked, if you would, for lack of a better word, but they're just acting out of fear. And then there's the colluders who really is almost like they have an agenda. They want to climb that ladder and they don't care who they're going to step over, right? So I always say, even if you take care of the toxic leader at the top, you must take care of the colluders and the conformers and take care of the environment. The environment meaning, if it's an unstable environment, let's say lack of resources or turnover with leadership, is unstable. So it's gonna definitely contribute to that toxic triangle. So my point is you need to break down that triangle, metaphorical triangle, and don't just focus on the top only. You have to address all three components. So going back to the example you gave of an environment whereby, and I'm just paraphrasing, someone might come in, maybe a client or a customer that's maybe rude to an employee, and the supervisor coming in. I think that's what you said. So something to that extent. Is
Well,
that it?
somebody stepping in and saying that's not acceptable. So even
Exactly.
if it's
Yes.
not a customer, even if it's another employee, because we've all been
Yes.
in situations, I mean, I've been a nurse for years. I've had doctors speak disrespectful, and I've had to tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not your wife or your daughter, and if I was, it still wouldn't be acceptable.
Good,
Do
good.
not talk to me in that manner.
Well
And
done.
and that's it. And but not everybody is at that place where they'll say that, but you do have to create those healthy boundaries. And
Yes.
there are those people, like you said, that are just conformists because they need the job. And but it's the risk versus benefits of keeping that job. So I always go to that. I always look at the risks and the benefits of, is this
Mhm.
healthy or unhealthy, and what can I do to make it better?
Mhm.
So
And it's
um
not just about keeping the job with them. Some of them is all about being in the in group or in the
mm,
out group. It's almost like going back to the sandbox. You think adults would have learned by now, but sadly, the same thing is perpetrated and permeated in workplaces. People want to be accepted, and sometimes when they want to be accepted, they don't care how they get accepted. Even if they step on other people or they bully or they block or exclude people, which is unfortunate. So yes, the solution is to create a healthy organizational culture and climate. Really, more of the research is beginning to show that right now. That's what that really matters is the culture. Because lots of people leave jobs, sometimes because of a bad boss or toxic colleagues. That's why they leave it. So going back to what you said about the risk benefit ratio, as in maybe they need the money to stay in a job. But for me, I always say, you know what? Is your sanity worth remaining in that place? Yes, you need money to live. Yes, you need that security. But really, which is worse, losing your sanity or worst case scenario, there have been people, and I don't mean to be morbid, who've taken their lives because it was such a toxic culture. They were bullied and they thought there was no hope. They didn't have a confidence. So I always say, find a confidence within and outside of your workplace, someone you can confide in. Because when you're going through difficult situations like that, sometimes you might be a tad jaded. Jaded in the sense you think, you know what, it's just me, or maybe there's something wrong with me. So you need that objective party looking
agreed.
in. Yeah.
Agreed. And there's been situations where people go in and they go what we call postal because they didn't have outlets. They didn't have someone to really confide in. And they did feel so. I mean, people can react in different ways when
Yeah.
they're under extreme stress and the environment is toxicity creates more toxicity. So you have to step away from that and bring in a culture of change, and people have to be
Yes.
willing to change. And a lot
Yes.
of times people at the top levels are resistant to change because they like that power, and they like being able to control the scenarios and the
Hmm.
people that are beneath them, and they're afraid to step out of that because they're afraid of maybe losing some of that control. And I think that it would help them have better control over, not even control, because if you're working together as a team, that control doesn't really become necessary because there's one moving part. You're functioning as a whole. You're no longer independent of one another. And I think that productively, you get so much more accomplished when you're working together towards the same goal. And a lot of them may feel like having those little spas that you go to and listen to music might be taking company time, but when those people that are happy and their stress is reduced come back to that line or wherever they're working, they're going to be more productive.
Now I like what you just said, and let's talk about the team aspect of things you just brought up. Not all teams are made equal. And what I'm about to say applies to any teams, regardless of industry. Each team has stages. There's the foreman, there's the storeman, there's the Norman, there's the performing, and another group of authors added are journeying. So wherever that stage or what stage the team is in, you're going to see them either forming. So every team needs to be formed to begin with, right? So I think not I think, it's imperative and paramount that the leader that's in charge of forming this team chooses the right people based on temperament, well, if someone is true to their true colors, expertise, diversity, and I'm not just talking about racial or ethnic, I'm talking about diversity of thoughts, someone that can really add value to the team, right? So you want to make sure you choose the right parties for the team, right? So that's part of the forming process. And then there's going to be a storming process. That is a given. No matter how harmonious, oh yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. And let me just pause for a second. Just remind me, we're talking about work-life. I like to say work-life harmony versus balance, but just remind me about that. So a team, no matter how harmonious you think they might work, they'll still have to go through a storming phase. And basically, think of it like
Getting to know each
sandpaper.
other, getting to,
Yes, it has to happen. It's a
it
given,
does,
right?
it does.
So the question
Everybody's
is, will
different.
they survive during that storming phase? You hope they do, so they can move to Norman, where things start getting normalized, and then they go into performing. But like I said, a group of authors added another phase rather, or stage called adjourning, which means basically, no matter how harmonious their team is and functioning and productive, okay, there comes a point in time where a team member might be, you know what, I've acquired all the knowledge I can. I've given all that I can give. I want to be strengthened. I want to grow further. And then they leave. But that's a peaceful kind of adjourning versus destructive conflict where they're like, I'm done. Get me out of here. Two different scenarios, right?
Very different.
Right. So, yeah. So, going back to the work life balance, I too, once upon a time, used to use the word work life balance and all of that. But then I had an epiphany where I heard someone else say, instead of balance, say harmony. You can't really get that balance. It's better to have a harmonious between you rather have your work life and your personal life be in harmony. Whenever I think about work-life balance, and I'm using the word balance, I think of a seesaw, right? So, but what I don't know, did you ever play with a seesaw growing
Of
up?
course.
Okay.
Of course I
Yeah, I
did.
know it sounds like a very silly question, but you'd be surprised. Not everyone might have, but I don't want to be presumptuous. But I did. But the beauty of it for me was one person has to sit down so that the person could go all the way up and so forth. But truly, what we're talking about, we don't want one to be way down and one way up. So hence people use the word balance, but I like harmony. Think of it like an orchestra in the sense that you have different musicians, different instruments. You can still hear the different nuances, well, if you have a good ear, the different nuances of each instrument's sound and stuff, but there has to be a harmony. So it's kind of like organized. I don't want to say organized chaos because orchestra is not chaos. But in our lives, in our work life, there might be what might be deemed to be chaos, but perhaps that organized chaos, maybe it could be what some might call work-life harmony. But in terms of the balance, it's never equal. We might strive for that, but I don't want people to be naive to think that it will always be. But I think it's coming to a point whereby you feel, you know what, I'm doing very well at home in terms of providing quality time to my family members. I'm productive at work. And outside of both work and life, I have extracurricular activities, so to speak. So that's something I just wanted to bring in for what it's worth.
And I think that there can be a kinds of communion at work because as you said, everybody really is different. And I think that when people are placed in the right roles that you spoke of before, the forming process, and their strengths are really accentuated and they're driven towards those tasks, when people are doing things they're good at and they enjoy, they do excel and they do
Yes.
need that time to shine. And by putting them in the right position, you allow them to shine. And then there's really, but there has to be a culture where everybody shines, where you have to not just put this one in the spotlight all the time, because then you are creating animosity and a disequilibrium. So you do have to accentuate different parts of that team. Like if someone's working on a project and it's a big project, highlight how all of those people and all of their skills really make that end result and that outcome, so that they
I
can
agree.
see that they all work together, because they're not at different levels. They're different people and good at different skills. But because their skills are different doesn't mean they're at a different level. If they're still all employees and they're all working on the same team, then they really should be at the same level. And people should be able to experience those highlights, like job well done. Hey, good job.
Rewards
You
and
did a
praise.
great design on this graphic, and it really accentuated the project that we were working on and brought it
Yeah.
together nicely. I think that we as a culture don't really give enough that a boys, where and people need and people need a that a boy, good job. Every once in a while you need to feel appreciated and valued as part of that team, not that
I
you're just an employee. Because when you feel like you're part of that work culture and you're part of that vision, that long-term vision, you're going to step up and put your best foot forward, because now it's not just a job. Now it's a vision, and we're all aligned with the same vision to grow this company, to enhance, let's say it's a health company, to enhance health globally, right? So we're all working towards the same vision, and each of us has different skills. And part of that culture of balance is teaching each other each other's skills, right? So there should be days where we have to switch roles to see really what it's like to be in the other person's shoes, so that
okay.
we can appreciate that what they're doing is not that easy.
So
And
I
wow,
like what you said. Sorry, I like what you said. Three things. Sorry to interrupt you there. Sorry, I'll interject real quick. Is that okay? Sorry.
sure, go
Sorry.
ahead.
So three things. I love what you said. So I don't know if you realized it, but everything you just said is all coming back to what I kind of alluded to, the work culture. Not again, just like I said, not all teams are made equal. Not all cultures are made equal. There are different categories of culture. There's the clan culture, which is the one I believe you're more gravitating towards, and which the research shows clan or collaborative culture is the one we should all strive for. But there's also a competitive culture. There's one that's of hierarchy. And I added one that I didn't find in the research, dysfunctional culture, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Now,
those.
depending on the industry you work in and the department, even if it's the healthcare industry, for instance, there are different departments in the healthcare industry. Certain cultures might be better depending on the department. But ultimately, the long-standing one that people will feel really appreciated is the clan or the clan culture, the collaborative culture. Okay.